Thank you, Dr. Osama, for your, outstanding and support for the, flagship initiative, and your wording is going to be, helping us to continue forward. Okay. Our next speaker, Dr. Asa Fly, the Director General at the Islamic Development Bank Group. Yeah, what are the Islamic Development Bank Group ongoing effort and plans to support the agriculture food system transformation in the member country? We need to know and heard from the Islamic Bank how can they tackle the food security, particularly when it comes to the small farmer. The floor is yours, please. You want to be here? Come, you could come.
I'm okay. Hello. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Excellencies, colleagues, I'm very proud to be here today, and I would like to start by thanking AGFUND, BADEA, and the lab for having us here today for the very important launch. This is an initiative that we've been following and then really coming at the right moment, at the timely. Why is it timely? For the Islamic Development Bank, as you know, we're the bank for the South. Our membership is entirely for the South, and we work with them to try to deliver for the South. And when you look at our constituencies, the majority of countries are grappling with many challenges. It's multifaceted. It goes from socioeconomic development issues, access to basic services, poverty, and you name it. And this is aggravated by the effect of climate change, as you know, conflict and geopolitical tension, and so on and so forth. So we have existential questions. And food security is one of the challenges we need to grapple with and need to fix. And in the 44 countries that are low-income food deficits, 24 countries are our membership, from our membership. And among those 24, 17 has high vulnerability indexes, high vulnerability to food. So this is something that we need to tackle, and we need to tackle head-on now. The financing gap is enormous. It's 500 billion a year to transform agri-food systems in the world, including our member countries. On our side, we have been trying to do a lot. We have been trying to approach the issues not in a very vertical and narrowly defined way, but in a more systemic way. Because we are trying to move from this model of growth and economic growth and all to a model of building resilience. I think that this is, Professor, something that I would really like to talk a little bit more. How can we move from this growth model? We are always looking at how can we increase the growth of productivity in agriculture, to look at the whole agri-system and make sure we build resilience. Because when you have the resiliency, the growth will be a part of that dynamics. But we are all the time looking for growth while not looking at the system as a whole. So this is something that we're trying to do, building resilience around that. And this brings us to talk about this climate, water, energy, and food system nexus that we're trying to do. We're not looking at in a very isolated way. We're trying to look at the whole system of agri-production. We have funded 4.4 billion of projects around land and drought projects since 2018. Just recently, we financed water project in Kazakhstan was 1.15 billion to Kazakhstan, and then the other one was in Azerbaijan. So in Central Asia, we are trying to build the infrastructure, water-related infrastructure, again, to make sure that we provide food systems. So this is something that we are trying to do. We also have some initiative around food security itself. Not only looking at the emergency side of it, which is we providing response to crisis, food security crisis that we have been doing since 2022. 10.5 billion is going to that. 90% of that has been approved already and being implemented. But we want to go a little bit further to bring technology and innovation into fighting food insecurity. And this is where we try to bring biotechnology, promoting digitalization and agri-ecological farming into the way we finance our project. So all of this is being done while we're looking at resiliency. And to us, we cannot talk about food system resilience without looking at the small farmers, smallholders, as Dr. Nasser, you just said. And this is where our Life and Livelihood Fund is trying to help us really blend concessional money with some of the market-based financing. And we have put there $1 billion for agri and agri-food systems, trying to combine Islamic microfinance into this. Another product that we are trying to pilot and test with the UNDP is the Takaful, which is the Islamic finance insurance. Because we believe that the smallholders are not protected. Financial protection is an issue. And again, we are thinking about value chain, not only the system, but looking at the whole value chain. Bringing insurance is something that we are trying to do. But going forward, one thing that we have been trying to really push is these regional initiatives. Because for us, food security and food system is something that many countries are experiencing in our region. It's not one single country taken in isolation. We need to look at the regional dimension, and the studies that we have done in our experiences tells us that we need to look at the regional dimension on that. And the second element is the value chain dimensions. So we're looking at all the different parts on the value chain and making sure that we can provide the financing that is necessary. And last but not least, capacity building. I mean, Dr. Faki mentioned it. This is something also that as a South-South Cooperation Bank, we are trying to foster technical cooperation, change of tech expertise, know-how, and we have mechanism internally in the bank to try to do that, bringing experience from Malaysia to Sierra Leone, from Indonesia to Dakar, Senegal, and so on and so forth. This is something that we will continue doing. But before I finish, I would like to maybe submit to a couple of things. That the reason why I'm hopeful to this initiative is that I think as a development institution, we need to change the way we are doing business. We have been very fragmented for years and looking at these issues in a very isolated way. So I hope this initiative will bring us together and help us really work together and deliver on this endeavor. It needs to be this changing of mindset, the paradigm shift on how do we look at the challenges of development is really important. I think if we miss that, we're going to be here 10 years back talking about life online, not on track. We need to change that and really build resilience and do it together as partners. And doing together, this is really the tricky part. How can we deliver together, bringing technology, bringing science, bringing others into the discourse and making it happen? And one thing that made me a little bit remiss is that in this podium, I would have loved to see the private sector. The private sector should be part of this conversation. And I think that we are missing a big part of the solution if we don't bring them from get-go. We should not just make it like an afterthought, doing all the thing and then bring the private sector. They should be here with us. And when I talk about private sector, I'm thinking big companies, but also the smallholder farmers who are private sector in nature. They should be able to tell us what they would like to see, because we are devising something for them and they're not part of the discussion. I think this is really important to do. Another point that is important is let's make sure that we measure impact. How can we make sure that we can deliver and we are making change on the life of those people? If we don't have impact measurements, impact management systems, then we're going to miss that boat. And I think that all this discussion we're having around the COP and greening, sometimes it looks like we're doing greenwashing and green all this because we are not measuring and delivering on impact on the ground. So I think that I'll just leave it to that and looking forward to working with all of you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. As you heard, finances is there. We need innovative project, going to the root cause and talking about small farmer and that. And this is where all this about it, bringing all party together, scientists, technology, finance, implementers. That's why we now go into the private sector. From the next question will be to Mr. Antoni, the Chief Executive Officer of FERA. as a key component under the flagship is the strong and growing private sector engagement. How can the private sector best contribute to combating desertification and land degradation? What conditions need to present to attract private capital? What is fair capital vision in terms of engagement to revising land degradation? And we really appreciate, Anthony, your role of being with this initiative from the beginning in June, and your vision and your work being done with this initiative in Riyadh and New York, and now back to Riyadh and visit the field. I'll give you the floor to tell us what the private sector need to invest in this area. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Nasser. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with my esteemed panelists. And thank you to the AGFUND, to the United Nations, to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for their leadership. So maybe just to put in context where we fit in the private sector. So Fiera Capital is an investment manager. So we manage about $120 billion of investments across a variety of asset classes. So we're involved, of course, our clients are large pension plans, sovereign wealth funds, endowments. And what's particularly, I guess, relevant to this discussion is that we have a very large portion of our investments that are in natural capital. So agriculture, farmland, timberland. We've invested in about 5 million acres of land, so both timberland and farmland. So you can imagine that combating and preventing land degradation is very, very close to our heart. And it's very intuitive. If you're an investor, you want to make sure, if your pensioners are dependent on productivity of land to pay their pensions, you want to make sure that in 20, 25 years, 30 years from now, your land is more fertile, is more productive, and that you're taking care of your very scarce resource, which is water. So investment returns and sustainability of land are very, very closely aligned. One doesn't go without the other. So the good news is that there's a lot of solutions out there. There's been a lot of advancements in technology, but it requires capital. It requires capital. So you just think about soil mapping, science around crop rotation, science around seeds, precision agriculture. So whether it's buying camera sprayers that reduce pesticide use by 75, 80, 90%, whether it's planting new rootstock for an almond orchard, which is going to be a lot more efficient on water, which is going to be more resistant to pests, to drought, to wind damage. The solutions are out there. The science is evolving. Unfortunately, though, it often takes a lot of capital and it takes scale to be able to invest in those expensive technology. So how can the private sector actually help and participate in reversing these trends? Well, first of all, even on the large scale side, is investing in those technologies. So that will help the overall asset base and land base from reversing that trend. But second of all, sharing those best practices as well, and to disseminate them within the smaller farming community. Dr. Kramer is going to talk about it in a minute, but there's some really interesting projects out there as well to disseminate some of this technology, whether it's through cooperatives, whether it's through government initiatives. The other element, which I think is very crucial around how can the private sector help, are public-private partnerships. We all know planting trees, afforestation projects, are great to combat desertification, are great to reduce the temperature. is going to be very good in the long run to help agriculture. Public-private partnerships are all over the world in infrastructure. Why couldn't they be there for afforestation projects to plant trees? And we are actually, right now, in discussions with various governments around how we can bring the private sector and our investor money in partnership with governments to help plant trees on a massive scale. The benefits, of course, is knowledge transfer and technology transfer from private sector actors that have done massive commercial tree planting projects. Of course, it's around execution capabilities of delivering these projects, but it's also about bringing FDI into these countries. Now, the question that people are often going to ask is, well, how are private investors, pension plans, endowments, how are they going to generate returns from planting trees? In the US, in New Zealand, in places where it rains a lot, you can have viable carbon markets where you can plant trees and get paid by the carbon markets. In places where trees grow more slowly, have a lack of water, it's more expensive to plant these trees, well, guess what? Unfortunately, the carbon market in and of itself won't justify the cost of investment. That being said, there are huge, huge benefits for generations for those countries to plant these trees. So of course, in this situation, you need to have government guaranteed returns or government subsidies. And that is very important because our investors want to have impact, but they also need to see returns. And I think these could be win-win situations for the very long-term benefit of populations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You remember when we met to discuss SDGs, we're saying, where is the private sector? Now, we hear the private sector. We've been required to have a really clear vision. How can we achieve SDGs and how can we link this and tackle it with land degradation? And the way we do it, we have to do public-private partnership. In a way, private sector will come with their international and local expertise. Some of us never think that, private sector already been involved in investing in land degradation. And this is something, we lately, myself, I did not know that until June when Fair Capital, because I knew Fair Capital that they're investing in sustainable agriculture. But in this area, that's where we need Fair Capital, other private sector, to come with their expertise to do a positive impact and tackle land degradation, as well as they have to make a reasonable return to grow up. And this is, thank you very much for making this clear and loud. Now we go to Dr. Declan. We want to talk about science. Dr. Declan is the Managing Director for UN Science Summit. With your support through the so successful Science Summit event at the United Nations, your help the flagship to get so much traction. What role do you foresee for the Science Summit as an integral annual milestone event in the flagship? The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Al-Qahtani. And first, let me say how delighted I am to be here and to have the opportunity to talk and discuss and make a humble contribution to the dialogue. And within that, showing how science contributes. So first of all, Dr. Al-Qahtani, would like to really commend you on your foresight and vision at AGFUND and Dr. Ta at BADEA, and of course ably supported by Dr. Conrad Rain, whom we all know. But I suppose just by way of context setting, and I think a lot of this came up at the Science Summit in New York in September, we hear a lot about the food security nexus, but of course I'd like to suggest a modification to that term and call it the food security / health nexus, because of course by food has a huge contribution to health, public health, and I think that needs to be recognized. So looking at what we generally call food security, food capacity building, and indeed health, I think we are looking at essentially the two global priorities for the development agenda, and so how does science contribute to that? First of all, I'd like to just reflect on, when we talk about science, we talk about, of course, many areas of innovation and the contribution of innovation, but I suppose for the purposes of this conversation, I'd like to really raise awareness between the pre-competitive space, if you like, and the competitive space. And the pre-competitive space, I think, is hugely, hugely important. And typically, this is government funded, but increasingly we're seeing the private sector involved in science capacity building, for example. And at the Science Summit, we are very much driving the dialogue, driving awareness, and really looking at how global policy can support capacity building for science. And I think the AGFUND initiative here is a groundbreaking program, and it represents a step forward and indeed a leap towards combating desertification, land degradation, and the intertwined challenges of poverty, malnutrition, and environmental degradation. I think together with the partners BADEA, the Innovation Commission at the University of Chicago, and the other partners who have supported this initiative, we're about to embark on a journey that promises to transform solutions for Africa's most vulnerable regions. And building science capacity around that, I think, can be fundamental in how we can achieve the change that Dr. Tao was talking about. But that does need a revision. It needs change making. It needs a thought process that is very different from the one we have today. And of course, when we talk about global growth, essentially we're talking about a default competitive model. And competition is fantastic, but of course competition can be very exclusive. And who are excluded? Very much the communities we're referring by default here today. So when we look at these challenges, we need to look at inclusion, but that inclusion needs to be based on a revision of the enabling policy environment that provides the funding instruments and the policy basis that, and the mechanisms that allow science to take place. So I think in the years ahead, we can look at how science can transform in terms of innovation technologies, and we've heard technology transfer spoken about today, very, very important. But also we need to recognize that there are existing mechanisms, and if you look at the TRIPS agreement, the Trade-Related Intellectual Property Rights, Article 66.2 of that provides fundamental mechanisms for the technology transfer from essentially developed nations to less developed nations, and that is wonderful. But you know what the problem is? It's not used. It doesn't happen. The technology isn't transferred. So I think that's just an instance I would point to where there is existing provision, but it's not used. So I want to raise awareness of that. If we look at the patent system, and I'm happy to be corrected, but my understanding is that about 5 million patents go off patent every year. And this is knowledge and know-how that's available to the communities we're talking about here today. But again, it's not used. Why is it not used? I'm not presenting this as simple. These things are complicated, but basically the mechanisms and the dissemination that you were talking about, those channels don't exist. At least they don't exist to enable benefits to be brought to the rural communities in Africa. So I think that needs a revision in how we approach that. So technology transfer, absolutely vital. We also need to address climate resilient solutions. Science offers the means to mitigate the effect of climate change through innovations like rainwater harvesting that we've heard about, and improved soil management techniques. And again, the key word here is collaborative research and development. Collaborative research and development. I'm repeating it. AGFUND, BADEA, and the other partners, in my view, are and have recognized this, but we need to understand what does that look like in terms of infrastructure, capacity, and of course, finance. And that's why I was particularly interested in the conversation earlier and listening to you, Dr. Al-Qahtani, on Islamic finance. And I think the broad awareness of the contribution of Islamic finance to these global challenges has a long way to go in our understanding of this enormous contribution and how that can help the change I'm talking about. Evidence-based solutions, very, very important, and and we've heard a lot of discussion about evidence-based solutions and providing that evidence to policymakers and funders. However, we can't use evidence-based and metrics as a stick to beat the less developed communities that we're talking about here today. So it can't only be metrics-based. We've got to have a social benefits model instead of the KPI system that by and large is used as the evaluation criteria. So this needs to change, and I think there's a huge opportunity for that. So really, Dr. Al-Qahtani, delighted to be here, looking forward to the conversation, looking forward to the next 5 years, looking forward to driving science in all the ways that we know are very necessary. And again, I would just point to the huge opportunities here, the opportunities to build that collective capacity. My argument is it doesn't necessarily need more money, it just needs an understanding of how the money system works so that it can be inclusive and it can be collaborative. And I think that's the final comment I would make. So back to you, Dr. Al-Qahtani. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. Thank you.
Dr. Declan, thank you very much for your leadership. We admire what you're doing through the Science Summit. You're bringing this next to United Nations every year, and without Science Summit, we would not even, get together and discuss technology and science together. That's where we in AGFUND learn how can we do financial inclusion. And this is where we need, this is with technology and science, help us how to make it accessible, affordable, and sustainable. And I always take this as an example. Imagine today that most of the people in Africa have a mobile. Why that's happening? Because mobile became in Africa accessible, affordable, and sustainable, and private sector invested in it. Imagine today we solve most of our problem for financial inclusion through mobile wallet. That would not happen, 20 years ago without science and technology. And that will take me go to the President Sidi Waldetta, the President of BADEA. As a founder, Dr. Sidi, of the Nobel Initiative, where do you see BADEA role moving forward in terms of focus area of investing in country and region, and particularly in Africa, and how can we help more in Sahel? The floor is yours, Dr.
Thank you very much. First of all, allow me to commend the organization of this COP16 here in Riyadh, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which is an unprecedented event. I would like also to reiterate BADEA's commitment to this 5-year global flagship initiative for food security. And our commitment stems from the mandate of the bank and its strategy, BADEA 2030, which is centered around 4 main pillars, and each pillar speaks to the food security issue in Africa. As you may know, Africa, which is a geographic space in which BADEA operates, has been affected by land degradation more than any other place in the world. And it is a little bit paradoxical to see that the African continent is contributing to the sequestration of emission, of the global emission. Most of the global emission are sequestrated by the African continent, but most part of Africa also are suffering from extreme events, drought, floods, and so on. In this context, and in a continent where more than 80% of the food is produced by small farmers, it is critical for a development bank such as BADEA, but also for all of you as partners today, to join hands and to develop integrated solution to face the challenges which are hampering the development of sustainable food security systems in the continent. And I'm really very happy about the composition of this panel, because it reflects the need for partnership among all the stakeholders. Each one of you has a very instrumental contribution to food security. Without science, we will not be able to progress. Without finance, we will not be able to develop projects. Without the convening power of the United Nations, will not be able to gather people and to have things done. Without the contribution of each one of you, we will not be able to move. And together, we can do what none of us can do alone. So this is the sense of the partnership we are advocating at BADEA, but also the sense of our strategy, BADEA 2030, which places the partnership at the top of our priorities. Having said that, let us a little bit talk about what can be done in the next 5 years in Africa. And I do believe that the experience already of AGFUND in supporting small farmers, providing integrated solution, including seeds, micro-insurance, microfinance, and knowledge, is something we can build on. And it can be the starting point for our action for the next 5 years. We can scale it up, we can learn lessons from it, and we can synergize among ourselves to make it bigger, more sustainable, more affordable, and contribute better to the life and livelihood of the population, but also to attract the private sector, because we need to attract the private sector. We have to be very frank. DFIs, philanthropia alone cannot provide enough resources to develop solutions for the world. So it's only when we bring on board the private sector that we will have projects at scale. And that is required to overcome the various difficulties the population in Africa and elsewhere are facing. So from BADEA's perspective, it's about partnership, partnership, and partnership. Thank you.
And I will add, and partnership with Dr. Sidi Weldatta through BADEA. That's one more thing. Partnership make us success. Your leadership, Dr. Sidi, of what you achieved together with partnership with AGFUND in Africa, that's really anticipated and appreciated. Your leadership among Arab Confederation Group, appreciated by all members, all men. Thank you very much for that. Going to Dr. Stephen, the Executive Director of the Crop Trust. You have been extremely excited and supportive for the flagship. Could you share with us how you see the role of Crop Trust, and in particular for the Secretariat moving forward, especially when it's come to visibility and showing the progress of the flagship and its fund project, event, engagement of the private sector, and growth of the flagship. Stephen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nasser. Excellencies, distinguished guests, I'm so grateful to all who made this flagship possible. The flagship will scale innovations that support the transformation towards diverse, resilient, sustainable, and nutritious agri-food systems. This will help millions of people, as we have heard, in particular smallholder farmers in some of the world's poorest and most vulnerable regions. The flagship will help to produce more food, to eliminate hunger, and to produce better quality, more nutritious food. To achieve this, the flagship will take a holistic approach, and that has already been mentioned on various occasions here, and consistently be guided by the following 3 key principles. First, to be productive and able to find their way out of poverty. So make smallholder farming, or being a smallholder farmer, from a fate to a business opportunity. Farmers need what I like to call the magic 6. Access to fertile land that is not degraded. Second, access to water, access to knowledge, access to markets, access to credit and insurance, and access, last but not least, access to various inputs, in particular improved seeds. You see right away, ladies and gentlemen, that this requires not just technical innovation, but also social and institutional innovation. Second, there is no one-size-fits-all. One of the core concerns, and at the same time one of the strategic starting points of this flagship, is the diversification of agri-food systems. Diversification as a broad innovation concept means using a wide range of options and spreading risks. There can be no structural resilience without diversity. For the design and implementation of the flagship initiative, that means we need improved and climate-adapted crops for extreme conditions. The conservation and use of plant genetic resources present a key solution for enhancing food security. These resources are crucial for breeding new crop varieties that are adapted to extreme climate conditions, to new pests and diseases, to nutritional needs. The conservation and sustainable use of this genetic diversity help to strengthen the resilience of local farming systems. If the supply of high-yielding standard crops is complemented by the supply of improved, traditional and underutilized crops, the range of options broadens. This directly contributes to reducing crop failure and improving livelihoods. Diversifying food supplies, crops such quinoa, teff, and various root and tuber plants are not only drought-resistant, but also rich in essential nutrients. This can help reduce nutritional deficits and improve the health of local populations. Promoting sustainable agriculture means by incorporating local adapted varieties and traditional farming methods, including planted diverse trees for diverse tree landscape, as already has been mentioned. The need for irrigation, pesticides and fertilizers can be reduced, and this conserves natural resources while ensuring stable food production. Third point, partnerships and cooperation is key at all dimension level. Cooperation among donors and partners, cooperation along the value chains, cooperation between public and private sectors. Yes, this is key, this is absolutely important. And cooperation between research, development and implementation. And ladies and gentlemen, talking about cooperation brings me to my final and crucial point, the need for coordination of activities by a highly professional, efficient and effective secretariat for the initiative. The Crop Trust is pleased to take on this task. The Crop Trust is an international organization with 20 years of experience in providing technical and financial support for the conservation and use of genetic resources and the diversification of agri-food systems. The Crop Trust is embedded in a broad network of international and national agricultural research institutions. And the Crop Trust is one of the 4 lead implementing agencies of the Vision for Adapted Crops and Soils, the so-called VAX initiative. I'm so pleased to see the key initiator of this initiative, this year's World Food Prize laureate, Dr. Carrie Fowler, among our distinguished guests here. The Crop Trust sees its role as a secretariat of the flagship as that of an active moderator and agile coordinator of the various projects and processes. The Secretariat will bring together the relevant stakeholders to the table, ensures coordination, transparency, monitoring of impact, reporting, mutual learning, and visibility. We, the flagship partners, want to achieve a lot on the ground, and we also want to communicate what we have achieved. Only in this way we can make sure that the necessary broad diffusion of innovation succeeds and food security for all be achieved. Thank you very much for your attention and trust. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your support and the good word about the initiative. And I remember when Professor Kramer, when we met, we thought this project will be globally within 5 years. It's within a year now. Thank you for the Professor Kramer and our partner BADEA. And now, last but not least, we want to turn to the Nobel laureate, Professor Michael Kramer, and the chair of the Innovation Commission, who will deliver a keynote with a visionary outlook of how he sees the flagship involvement over the next year and addressing the interrelated challenge of land, climate, biodiversity, and water. Finally, what are the most important ingredients to make the flagship a successful and replicable experience? The floor is yours, Dr. Kramer. You want to be here? Huh? I take your seat.
Hey, I'm delighted to be working together with UNCCD, AGFUND, and BADEA to launch the 5-year flagship initiative for food security and sustainable development, as well as with our new partners, such as Crop Trust. UNCCD estimates that desertification and land degradation more generally affect 2 billion people in some of the most vulnerable areas of the world. In increasing temperatures, altering precipitation patterns, and enhancing evapotranspiration due to climate change, increase land degradation and contribute to desertification in complex ways. Let me note that this is a problem, a huge problem for those living in the areas, but it's really a problem around the world because of the international consequences. A meta-analysis found that for each standard deviation change in climate towards warmer temperatures or more extreme rainfall, interpersonal violence rises 2% and intergroup conflict rises 5%. And that, of course, creates international impact. I'd like to thank AGFUND and BADEA for their leadership in addressing this issue and for the milestones achieved so far, including the workshop in Riyadh in early June, the Science Summit in New York, and the briefing event at the World Food Day in Rome in October. And also those who've joined the flagship, including Crop Trust, Islamic Development Bank, OPEC Fund, and many other partners. Saudi Arabia and UNCCD are elevating the global issue of desertification, land degradation, and food insecurity. So what I'd like to do in this talk is to highlight the role that evidence-based innovation can play in addressing this and in helping build resilience, as was highlighted by Dr. Fay, and give examples of some innovations that have evidence of impact and cost effectiveness, and that also have the potential to scale. And one thing that we've heard is the important roles of both the public and private sector. And so I'd like to give one example where I think the public sector will play a leading role, and one example where I think the private sector will play a leading role, although, of course, cooperation from both is required in each of them. So let me start out just saying a little bit about the process. I'm going to highlight two innovations today, but I wanted to note that, these are just a small subset. We've been working to go through a process through the Innovation Commission to look at a whole range of innovations. And what we've been doing with that is we've reviewed the literature on a number of different innovations to look for things that have rigorous evidence, typically from randomized controlled trials, not just on the impact of the innovation itself, but also on cost-effective methods to scale the innovation. Some things, the point was made that's very important to listen to the private sector, both the large investors, but also the smallholder farmers. And we need to know, what do smallholder farmers really want to adopt? And that's going to be essential. Now, based on that, in some cases, we're recommending either further testing or some modifications. But in some cases, things seem ready to scale, and obviously that should typically be accompanied by further A/B tests. But this, what we found is that this approach of trying to rigorously assess the evidence and find the things with the most impact is actually very useful in outreach to key decision makers in governments, in private sector firms, in NGOs, in multilateral development banks, and actually offers the opportunity to reach hundreds of millions of people. So, as I noted, we've identified a number of different innovations. Let me just, I'll say beyond just identifying the innovations, a number of different potential implementers have shared concept notes, and we've shared those with AGFUND and BADEA, and AGFUND has already provided support for the scale-up of rainwater harvesting techniques in Niger. And I'll just comment briefly on that. Most of our work, I'm going to mostly talk about numbers and statistics, but just a couple of days ago, I had the opportunity to see a video of some of this work of construction of demi-lunes to conserve land, as was mentioned. And it was really inspiring to see that degraded land, hard-packed soil, was transformed, and you were seeing areas of green really transforming this very arid landscape. And I think that's just transforming the landscape, but it's also transforming the lives of people. And I think that it's wonderful to see what AgFund has been doing on land degradation, and I think there are many other areas where all of the partners can do this. So let me turn to the two examples that I'll focus on today. So the first is one that I think has an important public sector role, which is bringing the benefits of digital agriculture to farmers. Now, farmers need to make a host of different decisions, and these are very complicated in the context of desertification and climate change. Let me just give one example of such a decision. If you're a farmer, you need to decide when to plant, okay? And you want to do that in a way that's ideally you would like a long growing season. So you'd like to plant when the rainy season has come. But if you plant too early and the rainy season hasn't really come, or if there's a few days of rain but then a dry spell, that can be a disaster because your seeds don't germinate, and you lose your inputs. So having the right type of information, whether it's on rain or on seed type or on soil management, is very important. Now, there's a lot of evidence that farmers respond to digitally delivered information. And I'll talk about a few examples. I won't go through them all. So on soil chemistry and soil health, I was involved in a meta-analysis of a number of different studies in East Africa on acidic soils, which can be treated with lime. And we found that the simple step of sending SMS messages increased the take-up of lime by 22% and also increased use of appropriate quantities of fertilizer. The cost of that's very low, so once a system is set up, it can reach very large scale at quite modest cost. The estimated costs of adding a farmer are very minimal. The estimated benefits we estimate at 46 times as large. So that creates an advantage of making the messages free for farmers because you typically get much lower uptake. And that's why there's often an important public sector role, but obviously private sector telcos can play a very important role as well. I mentioned the case of weather. I think that's a particularly exciting one because there's new technological breakthroughs in weather forecasting, particularly with the development of artificial intelligence, that make it possible to have more accurate forecasts and ultimately to develop tailored forecasts for farmers. So a farmer may not want to know just, will it rain tomorrow? They may need to know, well, over the next few days, will we have enough rain that it justifies planting? And can I be reasonably confident that there won't be a dry spell over the next few weeks? That's the type of thing that AI forecasts can do. So, and again, there are many studies indicating that farmers respond to this information. So let me give one example, and this is of the power of digital agriculture to leverage scale. And this is the government of Ethiopia's digital interactive system, which reaches millions of farmers. I had the opportunity, I'd done some work in Kenya on digital agriculture, and there were representatives of the Ethiopian government at a presentation I meant, and they invited me to come to Ethiopia to learn about their system, which indeed was very advanced. They were using their telephone system, and which is a government-owned telephone system. They were reaching really millions of farmers with this hotline, and they asked me, and I also worked with the Precision Development, an NGO that I co-founded and where I serve as a board member, to take a look at this. And what we found was that, consistent with the messages that were made earlier, it was really important to go to the farmers and to do focus group with the farmers. And when we did that, we started to learn the farmers' opinion of this system. And then we looked at the data from the system, and we saw that the phone calls farmers made in sometimes dropped because they got to places in the menu, press 1 for this, press 2 for that. Farmers were dropping out at certain points in that menu. So that led to a system of A/B tests to say, well, let's try changing the system in some ways and see if that improves things. Now, we were very nervous when we went to the Ethiopian government to present these results because they were very happy about the system. But and we found that sometimes some calls were dropping. But the reaction of the Ethiopian government was very inspiring. They said, we want to, this system is very important to us. We want to improve this system, and having these results on where farmers are dropping out and an A/B test looking at different varieties and how we can improve this is very valuable. And then they, thanks, and Jonathan Leahy, whose works at Precision Development, and I were presenting this together. We were thrilled to hear this, and we cooperated over the years, and they've built in these changes to their system, and indeed they're now reaching 20% more farmers due to that. They're now, I think, Ethiopia's recently adopted a new digital agricultural roadmap, The Gates Foundation has selected Precision Development as to lead a program management unit with the government of Ethiopia to help the government of Ethiopia implement this. And I think there's now an opportunity to provide digital agricultural advisory messages to millions of farmers and to millions of both directly through phones and through the tens of thousands of extension agents the government of Ethiopia has. And my understanding is that we'll hear an announcement about this later today. But I think this illustrates the potential to get to very large scale. One case where this has already been realized is in India, where we're also working with the government and with PXD. And they've sent 9 million messages to farmers. They're now interested in scaling that up, again, based on the evidence from a small-scale trial. And they would, the Asian Development Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank have just decided to scale this up. Should I wrap up? Okay, let me just, I see we're bit over time, so I won't go into detail on this, but let me just give an example of something that can be scaled up by the private sector. And these are loans for farmers to invest in resilience through water tanks. This helps if there's a delay in the rainy season, and farmers can get through a period of through dry spells with this. And we saw that the appropriate design of loans can help farmers invest in resilience. These are two examples. We're happy to work with partners who are interested in this in trying to scale up these and other innovations with evidence of impact and cost effectiveness. Happy to follow up afterwards. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Professor Kaima, for your keynote speak and for your work and your passionate and supporting small farmer. To conclude, I would like to thank UNCCD and the government of Saudi Arabia, the presidency, for organizing the biggest UNCCD Cup ever and supporting the flagship and making that flagship part of Riyadh action agenda that will help the flagship. And with that, continue for the University of Chicago and BADEA as a founder partner with AGFUND. And I will continue to thank the strong support from the Arab Coordination Group outlined in the communiqué pledge 10 billion published 2 days ago from the Arab Coordination Group for land degradation and drought, and this will add something good. And thanking in particularly the Islamic Development Bank and AGFUND to be part of this initiative along with BADEA and AGFUND. And we'd like really appreciate and thank for the Science Summit to welcome the flagship to be part of their annually, as well as we thank the Crop Trust for hosting the Secretariat for the flagship. And I cannot leave without thanking all the speakers. I know we have a lot of things to do, and please excuse us. We do have 8 distinguished speaker, and this is the support given from every one of them. And thank you very much for the private sector. Thank you very much for you to be patient and listen until the end of this session. Thank you very much.
COP16 in Riyadh is decisive and inspires real commitments for the future of the land that still allow us to feed ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Marioldi. We know that the golden age of water has ended, as Marioldi already stressed. Moreover, with projections suggesting that the global population could reach between 10 and 12 billion people by 2050, we will need to increase food production by more than 50% to meet the demands of growing population. However, given that the world